Now, some believe that Bernie Sanders has not been attacked and that's why his favorables would go down in a general election matchup. That's not remotely true. He's been attacked as a socialist dozens of times during the campaign. They say, oh, the Republicans would attack him as a socialist. Yeah, mission accomplished. Hillary Clinton already did that. The entire media already did that. They've attacked him in 100 different ways. He, on the other hand, I don't think has really laid a finger on her. And look, he's going to say it himself in a second. You're going to see it with your own eyes. But there were so many different opportunities to attack Hillary Clinton, and he wouldn't do it. I'm not alone in that frustration. Jordan Chariton, our reporter, caught up with Susan Sarandon on the campaign trail. She felt the same way. Let's watch that first.
You think that he could have been a little bit more specific or a little bit more aggressive?
Yeah, I wish sometimes. I do. I mean, I'd be standing there going, but just tell them. Maybe they don't know it, you know. But again, like you said, that's not who he is. He doesn't want to be divisive in that sense. And I think that I don't know. I don't know if he promised Obama when he went to meet him that, you know, he would not give. I don't know. I think she's ruining her chances. I don't think he could do a bigger job of it than she's already doing. But yeah, there have been times when I've been frustrated and say, but you're not telling them that, you know, you've this, and this, and there are so many examples of that. And it was just outrageous when she's against the 4 women and children, poisoning water, and doesn't support the $15 minimum wage. That's simple. And then runs up to be next to Cuomo when it's signed. And she's the one, her State Department was the one that knocked down the minimum wage in Haiti when that came up and they were trying to get more than, I think, 40 cents an hour or something. She got it knocked down. I mean, this is not pro-women. There's so many cases of things that, you know, and I try to, and I'm supposed to make it clear that bringing up any of these things is my own personal thing and that it is not the senator. And I do that with you and say, no, he's not going to be talking.
This message is not endorsed by Bernie Sanders.
It is not endorsed by Bernie Sanders because he doesn't want to call her a liar. He doesn't want to. But there, as Andrea Mitchell said the other day, well, it doesn't add up. We can say definitely it does not add up. You know, her timeline, everything.
So look, the reality is he's never attacked her on the quote-unquote damn emails. When that is ripe for attack. I mean, there's a dozen FBI agents who are investigating her now. Don't touch her, right? Won't name the things that she's flip-flopped on in regards to Wall Street. Won't talk about how on earth could you have been against gay marriage in the year 2012? I mean, look, he's brought up the issue. Here's what I would have said in a debate. How could you? How could you betray all those gay people who'd been fighting for gay rights all those years? That when they needed you in that fight, you refused to step up and you did it for politics. So you think Bernie Sanders would say any of that? He's not saying it because he's playing by Queensberry rules. He's got this white glove treatment. She's totally unburned, okay? And then you think Trump is going to back off any of that? I mean, Trump's going to hit her with all of that, and then Vince Foster, and then Monica Lewinsky. He's already done it. The person who actually hasn't been attacked is Hillary Clinton. So now, look, I'm going to show you one example from a debate. Now, here, Bernie Sanders claims that, oh, yeah, sure, I'll you know, because they tee it up for him. Go ahead and attack her on this Wall Street issue. And he claims he's going to, but as you can see from his answer, he actually doesn't do it. He, as usual, refuses to do it, and even Hillary Clinton points it out. Watch.
You've consistently criticized Secretary Clinton. You've consistently criticized Secretary Clinton for accepting money from Wall Street. Can you name one decision that she made as senator that shows that she favored banks because of the money she received?
Sure. The obvious decision is when the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior of Wall Street brought this country into the worst economic downturn since the Great Recession, the Great Depression of the 30s, when millions of people lost their jobs and their homes and their life savings. The obvious response to that is that you got a bunch of fraudulent operators and that they have got to be broken up. That was my view way back, and I introduced legislation to do that.
Well, you can tell, Dana, he cannot come up with any example because there is no example. And
I would have never let her get away with that. Bankruptcy bill. Everybody knows that you're against the bankruptcy bill and against what Wall Street wanted back when you were First Lady. Elizabeth Warren has talked about this, written about this. And then when you got elected with a lot of Wall Street money into the Senate, lo and behold, you were on the banker's side on that same bill. Oops, how did that happen? Yes, you switched your position on that. Glass-Steagall says they're allowed to gamble with our money. She says, no, I've always been in favor of letting them gamble with depositor money. That's not because you're pro-banker? Who in their right mind doesn't want Glass-Steagall brought in so that our depositor money is protected from their gambling? Everybody who's a progressive wants that. She doesn't. Why? Because of the Wall Street money. But he won't say it. She's the one who hasn't been attacked. In fact, I asked Bernie Sanders about his refusal to attack her on some issues when he was on this show. Let's listen to his answer. The one area where the superdelegates could be relevant, in my mind, is if there is an extraordinary circumstance. For example, if the FBI has a dozen agents investigating you and then you get indicted before the convention. Now, I'm not allowed to say that. That's what the rest of the media tells me. Shh, you're not allowed to talk about it. And what's interesting is you guys don't talk about it. So I'm wondering why you don't, because I'm pretty sure that if the FBI had a dozen agents investigating you, Hillary Clinton would talk about it.
Well, I'll tell you why. Because I'm running a different type of campaign, and because I think this profound disgust with the political process as it now stands. And what I have done my best in this campaign is not to attack Hillary Clinton on a personal level. And what I think the American people want to see is a discussion about the issues that impact their lives, okay?
The reality is, if he had gone after her on any of those issues, she's already got sky-high unfavorables. You know what? Every one of these issues sticks to her, right? She's the opposite of Teflon Don. Now, I'm not sure Teflon Don's really that Teflon either, because his unfavorables are also fairly high. But look at our unfavorables right now. 55% in the latest polling. Only 41% favorable. Jesus, it's literally historic. I'm going to tell you about that in a second. But that's a HuffPost pollster combination of polls. The latest one is Washington Post. Also, 41% favorable, 57% unfavorable, 46% strongly unfavorable. If Bernie Sanders had attacked her on any of those giant gaping issues that he had all the right in the world to attack on, those might have stuck. So now I tell you this because I'm worried that if she goes into a general election, that everything's going to stick to Velcro Hillary. So in fact, here, let me run video 8 for you guys here, because she went on Chris Hayes' program to hit Donald Trump on Trump University, which she absolutely should. And I agree with her on that. And then, of course, he asked about the Inspector General report about the emails. He's not her opponent like Bernie Sanders, who refuses to attack her on that. He's an anchor, so he asked her. And look at her answer. Let's watch the end.
And I just want to say a word about the recent report. You know, actually, the report makes clear that personal email use was the practice under other secretaries of state, and the rules were not clarified until after I had left. But as I've said many times, Chris, it was still a mistake. If I could go back, I would do it differently. And I understand people who have concerns about it, but I hope voters look at the full picture of everything I've done in my career and actually the full threat posed by a Donald Trump presidency, because if they do, I have faith in the American people that they will make the right choice here.
Look, she can't get it right. In the beginning, she refused to apologize about it, and everybody piled on, and that stuck to her. Now she apologizes over and over. Every interview, she apologizes for the emails. And that hasn't worked. And at the same time, she says, well, you know, judge me in the full context of my career. Not a winning argument, right? And then at the end, she says, okay, yeah, I'm bad, but Donald Trump's worse. Maybe that is your best argument, but boy, nothing bounces off of her, right? Now, let me give you more on the unfavorables. According to the Huffington Post, they say, in our review, even among likely voters, no non-incumbent candidates reached 55% unfavorable in any poll before Trump and Clinton. So now Trump, as I told you, also has terrible unfavorable numbers. These are the two most unpopular politicians of our lifetimes. Yet somehow they won the primaries, or Hillary Clinton right now close to winning the primaries. So America, what have you done? Okay, a Democratic Party, you leaned towards Hillary Clinton throughout this entire process, right? Boy, what a genius move. Oh, she's more likely to win. Every issue sticks to her. She didn't even get properly attacked in the primaries, but yet you're so confident that this historically unpopular candidate is the genius establishment pick and would do better than the guy who actually beats Donald Trump by 15 points in most of the polls and does way better than Hillary Clinton in every poll. By the way, the race is not over. There is voting, including the largest state in the union. That's going to happen on Tuesday. Every vote matters, and you should go vote your conscience, whatever it might happen to be. Okay, finally, one more piece of context. The Morning Consult here says about Clinton's numbers when you get into the details. Half of voters said Clinton's use of private email server was illegal, while more than a quarter of voters weren't sure if it was legal or not. Just less than a quarter, 22%, said that they believed it was legal. Only 20% of voters believed her practice was ethical. So let me just clarify that for you guys again. Only 22% of Americans believe that what she did with the emails was legal. Only 22%. And only whether legal or not, whether they're right or wrong about that opinion, only 20% of Americans believe that her actions were ethical. She's Velcro Hillary. Everything sticks to her. That's why she's got these sky-high unfavorables. Yet the Democratic establishment thinks that they're so smart and savvy for thoroughly supporting, and now, by the way, of course, in today's news, yet again, yelling at Bernie Sanders to get out of the race before the voting is done, because they're geniuses. They figured out the great candidate, the one with record low unfavorables that didn't get properly attacked in the primaries, and that is going to get the full brunt of Donald Trump's attacks, and that only 20% of Americans believe her actions, at least on the emails, was ethical, and 55 to 57% of them find her untrustworthy and unfavorable. It could be a disaster in the making. I hope to God it isn't. Donald Trump is a menace to this planet, and ironically, him being such a menace might save us, that at least we don't get him. But establishment, you wanted Hillary Clinton, but if she loses, don't you dare blame anyone but yourself, because this was your genius pick.